space food company really just wants to recreate the replicator from Star Trek, right? That's the holy grail. That's what people are after. I mean, when you think about food in space, the first thing you think about is probably tea Earl Grey hot, right? I mean, that's certainly the case for me. And the closest thing we have to that food replicator today is 3D printed food. And 3D printed food was a really big phase from like the mid 2000s to the mid 2010s. And then the bubble kind of burst. But it turns out there are still multiple companies who are making 3D printed food, many of which are being sold directly to consumers. So today I want to focus on the history of 3D printed food with NASA, and more importantly, some of those 3D printed foods that you can buy and eat today. I'm Sarah Gilbreth, and this is the Martian Street Food Society. So NASA first started really researching 3D printed food in 2006, and that was sort of the beginning of the 3D printed craze for everybody. I mean, universities were starting to get 3D printing machines, students were starting to experiment with it, everybody had that plastic octopus, you know the octopus. I've got the octopus, you've got the octopus, you know the one. Everybody 3D printed that same pattern. Actually, here. It's this guy, you know, we've all got him. It's the most ubiquitous 3D printing pattern out there. Seriously, why does everyone have this octopus? Whatever, with the height of 3D printing came the possibility of 3D printing food. Now, obviously, it's a little bit trickier to 3D print food than it is to print plastic. You need to make sure the food is in some kind of paste material, something that can go through an extruder. But it's not impossible. In fact, for anything that's batter-based, it worked really well. Like, remember that pancake printing bot that was like really trendy and went to all the maker fairs back in, gosh, I don't even remember what year that was. Was that 2015? This guy. You remember this guy. You've seen this guy. And weirdly, the listing is still on Amazon, although I don't think you've been able to buy this for like half a decade. But working with those batters in a way is actually kind of safer than making these things from scratch on the space station. As we've discussed, flour is pretty flammable. It has the ability to spontaneously combust. And so by mixing flour with various wet ingredients to make an extrudable batter, you're kind of negating some of that electrostatic property. Then in 2013, NASA launched a new program. My God, you're so loud. I'm so sorry about the banging that's going on in the background. They've been doing construction on the apartment right next to mine for a month. If you think it's annoying, imagine how I feel. In 2013, NASA developed the Advanced Food Program, which had the goal of making food more appealing to astronauts on longer missions. During that project, they collaborated with an organization called BHEX. Okay. Different location, hopefully it will be a little bit quieter. In 2013, NASA launched the Advanced Food Program, which had the goal of making food more appealing to astronauts on extended missions. They teamed with a company called BHEX. They produced a device called the Chef 3D, and this is the device that made 3D printed pizzas. It printed out all the ingredients, and all you had to do was just shove it in the oven. And this kicked off a 3D printed food boom in the mid-2010s. Absolutely everybody was doing this. On the one hand, you had companies like Dillon's Candy Bar, which had special machines at some of its flagship locations that allowed you to customize and print your own 3D printed gummy candies. They could even do selfies at one point. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have companies like the one that my job hired for our convention that printed people's faces into the foam on the tops of lattes. Within the space of a few years, it had gone from being the cutting edge of science to just another influencer gimmick for Instagram. But while a lot of those companies have gone under, there are still several companies that are offering 3D printed food directly to consumers. So let's go over some of the biggest ones, or at least the ones that I find the coolest. Number one, the OG themselves, BHEX, they're still in the mix. But instead of making pizzas, these days they primarily do decorations for the tops of cakes and cookies. It's a little odd to me, but you can go into several grocery stores in select locations and you'll find these machines where you'll get to either select a design or maybe in some cases even make your own design, which will be squirted out on the top of a cake or a cookie. And as an extra little tongue-in-cheek nod to their past, they have done cookie cakes that look like pizzas. Next up is Sugar Lab. Do you remember at the very beginning of this craze, these little hexagonal candies that were hollow in the middle? These things were all over the place. I genuinely feel like every single media outlet covered these things because they were the first real direct-to-consumer 3D printed food that really got traction. At least they were the first ones that I'd ever heard of. And I think this company actually did shut down for a little while, but they're back now and they have some really cool offerings. It's not just sugar, they also do chocolates and pastries, and the fact that they are 3D printing all of this means that they could do some really intricate designs that you physically couldn't do any other way. Like, look at these little potion bottles. How cute are these? And I love the detail here. They also have an entire recipe section on their website to teach you how to use things like their pastry shells and bake cakes in them, or use them as a vessel for mousses or different kinds of desserts. And like, how gorgeous is that? I want that. This is what I'm gonna do for Valentine's Day. Next up is Poseidon, which makes these 3D printed drink mix things. They have options for tea, for hot chocolate, and mostly for cocktails. And I actually think they look pretty good. It's a cool little thing that you don't really see very often. I have no idea how well they taste or how well they dissolve. You would think that maybe some of these shapes would dissolve at a different rate because the surface area is so oddly warped, but that actually sounds like kind of a fun experiment. And they have a ton of different options for various kinds of drinks, and I bet you could even mix some of them together, like the tea ones and the cocktail ones. Might be cool. Next up, pasta. If Mars doesn't have pasta, I'm not going. If Mars doesn't have pasta, I'm not going. So you know Berea pasta, right? Like, we all know Berea, it's in every single grocery store. But did you know that they have a special subsection of their company dedicated to making 3D printed pasta? Meet Blue Rhapsody by Berea. They have so many cool shapes. They do letters, they do numbers, they do symbols, and right now they've got a bunch of seasonal items out, so for this case it's Christmas trees and snowflakes. But for me, the most interesting part is that they are actively trying to optimize some of these pasta shapes for space. There's an article on their website right now called Blue Rhapsody is Ready for Space that talks about their inclusion in a space architecture and design program. Now, this is the particular shape that they had designed for this program, and it's good because it keeps all of its fillings, whether it's cheeses or sauces, as well as any different kinds of nutrients, completely contained in that little sphere, so you don't have to worry about any of the rest of it floating off in zero gravity. Now, honestly, it doesn't look that different from a ravioli, but if ravioli is just a standard pocket, this has the ability to be something much more than that. If you can 3D print this shape, you have complete control over how many pockets it has. They have the potential to design a pasta that has multiple different pockets layered on top of each other. There could be a pocket for sauce, a pocket for cheese, a pocket for added nutrients, a pocket for spices, all layered up together so that you get the full composition in each individual bite. So we're upgrading from pasta pocket to full-on pasta backpack, and let me tell you, I am on board with this. It even comes in different colors. Look, it's cute. And anybody can buy this right now. Like, you can go on their website and get the letters that spell out happy birthday or whatever you want. Whatever you want to say at dinner, say it with pasta. Next up, and I bet you're not going to see this one coming, salmon. Or, well, a kind of salmon. Revo Foods from Vienna is a company that produces plant-based 3D printed seafood. It's made with a host of superfoods, from pea proteins to algae extracts, and it's available in a lot of different countries in Europe right now. It's not currently available in America from what I can tell, but at the rate this company is growing, I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing this in grocery stores here in the next year. And in addition to being good for the consumer, because it doesn't have things like heavy metals or antibiotics that fish frequently have, it also helps curb the overfishing problem that we have right now. It's a really interesting company, and I know we're gonna see more from them. Finally, and this is a weird one, 3D printed sushi. Now, this is a high-concept, high-tech restaurant in Tokyo that was announced in 2020. It was supposed to get off the ground at the end of that year, but obviously we're in a global panini. I don't think that happened. And the concept behind it is super weird. Like, there's no other word for it. It's just weird. So the owners of this company want each person who dines with them to submit some kind of DNA sample ahead of their reservation so that the chefs can customize the meal to that person's individual nutritional needs. I would not be comfortable giving people my DNA before I go eat somewhere. I think that's very creepy. I guess I can understand why they want to do it, but you know, to each their own, I guess. And the company has released all kinds of digital images of what they think their 3D printed sushi will look like. And as we've seen with the previous company, you can 3D print vegan fish, so I guess it's not totally out of the realm of possibility. They're also using a kind of rice paste instead of individual rice grains, which makes sense and works for the project. So far, the only images that I've been able to find for this project are things like this. It's a really interesting concept, but most of the things that I'm finding are still just the CGI images. They're not actual products of the food. But honestly, if your proteins can be reduced down into an extrudable paste, there's no reason why something like 3D printed sushi couldn't work. Things like this one, I don't really see how that would be possible, but I would be fascinated to find out. Interestingly, this company is doing another 3D printed food project at the same time. It's on 3D printed wagashi. Now, if you've seen my old YouTube show, you might have seen the episode on wagashi, which is a kind of Japanese dessert, and it was frequently tied in with nature. So the thought process behind this particular project is to tie in the colors and the shapes with the current day's weather patterns. All of this is put on by the parent company called Open Meals. Like, look at this design for the sea urchin one. Isn't this cool? So basically they're taking sea urchin powder and they're using a CO2 laser to harden it out in those little radial spikes. And part of the reason for doing this is to get a better mouthfeel and also potentially to change the way the aroma is distributed, which would mean that eating this would be a completely different experience than eating sea urchin sushi at any other restaurant. And it looks awesome. It looks awesome. If they can pull that off, that's gonna be amazing. And this castle is supposed to be made of squid? I'm not really sure how they're gonna do that. I don't know if you can really get it to be that fine and stay rigid, but then be soft enough to eat. They say that it's supposed to melt in the mouth, and that to me is kind of at odds with the architecture of one of these traditional Japanese buildings. But again, absolutely fascinated to see where this project goes. And there you have it. Those are my top favorite 3D printed food companies that are currently selling things directly to consumers. My question for all of you guys is, if there were any food that you could 3D print yourself, what would it be and why? Thank you guys so much for watching. See you next time.